Hey, it's Tony Morra, the Downtown Batterie Studios. Come on in, let me show you around. This is the tracking room. Mainly for cutting drums. But because of the size of the room, I'm able to get some guys in here, so I do full-on rhythm tracking from time to time, but mostly it's drums. That's the most call that I get for tracking.
And this was originally your garage?
This was a garage. This was where the cars were, and that room in there that we'll get to later, that was a utility room. So it was really just my practice room. And I had a few mics around it and a little rolling mixer just because it was so loud. So just practice with headphones. I was touring at the time, working on the tracks and stuff and making sure everything worked. And little by little, guys kept saying, man, you should record this drum sound. Just get a computer. And I was like, yeah, all right, I'll look into it. So it turned into all of this.
But doesn't look like a garage. I mean, beautiful.
No. I've watched enough HGTV that I think I've come in touch with my home decorator.
And I see you've got some rugs up for
absorption. What was funny is, I don't know if you could see on the video, but this wall, when they did this wall, it's angled. It's like this. So, you know, the guy that did the room, he did a great job. It's a room built within a room. So soundproofing, it's more for sound coming in, but sound going out is good as well. But he did a really good job of that wall's on an angle, this wall's on an angle, that wall. Right,
so no parallel surfaces for standing waves.
And then when they did this wall, he said, I'm going to angle it a little so when, you know, it'll just give you more ambience. And it did. I mean, it made it. I mean, if everybody's played in a garage in their day, and you know how bombastically loud it is. Well, with the way he did it, it was even louder. And it was interesting. One of the things why this room is, and sometimes on film and video, even on pictures, the room looks a little bigger than it actually is. But one of the reasons why the room sound is also pretty cool is that when they were doing the ceiling part, they were measuring and all, you know, for whatever purposes they were measuring, and they were like, wow, when they built the garage floor, they made it slope with the driveway outside. So the room essentially, here's the ceiling and the floor goes like this, which is kind of cool because there's not a lot of standing waves between that, but it just moves around a lot. So when I first set up in here, I didn't have anything on the walls. It was crazy. There was so much room sound getting even into the close mics. I was like, man, I got to come up with a solution. So I had seen a picture of Adrian Young, the drummer from No Doubt at the time. This was like in 2003-04. And I noticed, oh yeah, there's rugs. And they're very cheap at Home Depot, you know, whatever they were. So I just got them, and my friend said, oh, you can. And
just trial and error? Trial
and error, just see how it works.
Yeah, the right amount?
So I tried one rug on each side, and then it was still, but the thing is, and the way I did it, is that, you know, I just grab it with a thing. If I want it to be ambient, I just take them down, drop them to the floor, bring them in the other room, and I have the wide open thing. Same with the rug over there. I noticed even once I got these in, that the sound was still bouncing off over here. And the left side of the kit just sounded really...
Right, yeah. You want it to be equal.
Yeah, so...
I've always appreciated... When you do anything to a room, it's like you need to, if you do it on the left, put diffusion on the left, you should put some diffusion on the right.
Right, exactly. Because, yeah, especially when you've got drums and you're trying to image them.
And you've got this DW kit here, right?
Yes, I'm a DW endorser. I've been since '97. They've been awesome. Actually, I've known John Gooden and Lombardi since the early days when they just had a foot pedal. So, yeah, these drums are a little thicker. They got rounded edges. They're a little warmer than the normal.
More vintage sounding.
A little vintage, a little better for recording. There's not a ton of overtones.
Yeah.
So, but they get enough attack. And I use G1 Evans heads. So they're one ply.
Yeah.
I don't use the two. And if I want to make them thicker, I could put moon gels on. But I like to get the brightness out of it because the drums are a little darker. But as you see, I have a plethora of other stuff that I use.
Do those ring during recordings? You ever have an issue with that?
No. What I do with the snare drums, I just take old charts or paper towels and I put them under the snare drums and gauge the snares.
Gotcha.
So old trick from working in a drum shop.
All right, so let's work from the outside of your room with your room mics.
Yeah.
And these look like stereo
The ribbons, they're interesting. I am awful with numbers.
Who makes them?
They're Audio Technica 4051 something, I think.
So there's stereo ribbons, and does that top capsule
No,
rotate?
this is not a stereo per se. It's a
Okay,
singular
I
mic.
thought it was like a top capsule.
No, yes, right. No, it's not. It's just got a long capsule, and the thing is that they're powered ribbon mics.
Yeah.
Which is really cool because you don't have to like get so hot, so I could, bash the distressors. You don't have to go full on and get a high noise floor. The noise floor is very low because with ribbon mics, sometimes you got to pop them up a little bit.
So you've got a space pair of room mics, condenser ribbon mics, so they're nice and silky.
They are very silky. They're really nice. I would love to get some Coles in here at some point, but I had some 80s that I had a guy who really did a lot of transformer work and put new ribbons in. They weren't Coles. They fooled one engineer when I brought them to another studio. They needed ribbon mics, and he thought they were Coles. It was pretty cool, but they weren't Coles, but they were close. But they were really dark. Yeah. And these just there's a little more top, because when you do rooms, you get a lot of low end in it. You get a lot of mush. And so the little bit of a high end that these have is nice.
And are these figure 8 or are they cardioid?
They're figure 8.
Figure 8. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's another reason why when these weren't here, like that, it would really be
right.
And sometimes if I want that, I get that,
Right. Okay, on to the kit. Mm-hmm. We'll start with the overheads. Looks like you have some, what are those, KM84s?
KM84s.
Neumann KM84s, small diaphragm condenser mics.
Yeah. I just, it's just, when I started doing the room, I just, my budget was like, okay, I'm going to get great microphones, good mic pre's, and I should be okay. I have good drums, and hopefully I play okay. But, I was like, I'm going to invest in, the best of what I could get. And with all the different, other than getting C12s, which, couldn't afford those for overheads. But I thought of 87s, and then a lot of people in town here were using Audio Technicas for overheads. But every time I worked with this guy, Steve Marcantonio, a lot at the Sound Kitchen, and a couple different other engineers, and they had these up. And I thought, boy, they sound really cool. I like them. The separation was nice. And, the thing is, for me personally, and I try to be, it's hard when you're doing a room like this and you're working with so many different people. You want to meet everybody's expectation of what they want to hear out of the drums. But what I've learned is over the years, it's best to be as neutral in the middle as you can, where people can go wherever they want with stuff, And I found with bigger condenser mics, like sometimes there's a lot of drums in those. With these, there's great separation, and it's really, you get a lot of the high end, and you still get the kit. You know what I mean? You could still dial in the kit.
I can see by the way you have it by the way you have in place. It's not like you're right on the cymbals. Some people get right down on them.
Yeah, one thing I learned many years ago in New York when I was like an intern and stuff, they would make their center of the kit was here.
Right. So the kick and the snare line up in the middle of the
in the middle of the track. So it's not like on the left side you got all snare. So actually this one, they moved a little bit. This one has to come out a little bit. I cleaned up for everybody, so stuff is moved. So yeah, so you I do like the snare drum to be as close as it can. And this one is actually, it's right over the hi-hat. So this one actually comes out probably to about here, really. So you get the cymbals, and the snare is, as like you said, as much in the middle as it can be.
Right.
So it does, some people are like, that's not the way I see it on TV. And I'm like, yeah, I don't believe everything you see on TV.
Right. Okay, so going down to the toms, you have ATM 25s?
23s on the high toms, 25s on the low toms. Okay. And again, that was when I first bought the studio, I did what everybody does. You get the Sennheiser 421s. It's just standard fare for drums. And I don't know if it's a DW thing, but they sounded tubby to me, a little too tubby in those with the 421s here. And then I asked around to a couple different engineers, and there's an old Yamaha. They have them over at Omni. I don't think Omni's there anymore. Is Omni still around? Or is it gone?
I think it's still there. I thought that what's our buddy that was leasing it, Mike? Chris Utley. Yeah, Chris Utley, I think moved his shop in there.
Well, they had these Yamaha 880s or something like that. I never saw them in my life. They were ridiculous sounding, and they were really cool. And he's like, you'll have a hard time finding them. He says, you know what's great? What's very similar to those is the ATM 23s and 25s. You kind of have to look for those too.
And are these like vintage ones, or are they the new ones?
No, these are vintage ones. These are
because
older
those
ones.
I've got the vintage ones too. I've heard that they're much better than the new ones.
Yeah, these.
I don't know if that
the newer ones sound a little more generic sounding, and these just have a nice, it's almost like they have that mid scoop out and the low end's kind of up. I don't know if it's intended that way, but they just sound really natural on the drums, and they give you a lot of what you need. They're not like, oh, this gives you a lot of attack, this gives you a lot of low end. It really, again, I wanted to embody as much as I could.
And for those who don't know, Tony does a bunch of tracking, and then it gets finished somewhere. So that's why I was talking about how flexible he wants to leave these drum sounds. It's not like he's the producer and songwriter and he's going to mix the record. He wants to give them as much flexibility. Okay, so looking quickly on your 57 here on the snare, which is, if it ain't broke,
don't fix it.
Don't fix it.
Yeah, and I'm like a really, the thing is, when you've done as many sessions as I have, when you're out in other rooms and I would always be the guy, like this was cool because this actually gave me another part of my career. When I used to track for anybody, I would ask, could I stay and hang out? Because I loved the other side of the glass. Now we're talking in the olden days, when the musicians came in, you played, you split. They didn't, but I loved the other side of the glass. When I was a kid with my cassette player, I used to hang blankets and put up Radio Shack mics and try and get the best sound. I was always very into that. So I always would stay and I would write down, like this guy used the mic. Okay, it was 3 inches from the head. This was,
right.
So I was always interested in, and the ones when I was tracking and didn't sound too good, I made note of those too. To avoid
what not to do. That's a great lesson.
What not to do, and of course on the session you just do it, you play, because you don't know what they're going for afterward. Like I said, so you do your gig and you go. But for my mental notes, I always and for my actual physical notes, was like, okay, I love this. I got to remember this. Another thing I do is I take a hypercardioid mic sometimes, really line it up with the head. I use 2 mics on the top snare. So that's kind of cool because it gives you a lot of crack on the top.
And what is the hypercardioid mic you put there?
It is oh my gosh.
It's not a 451, is it?
No, it's not. Michael Wagner used it, and I thought it was great. Unbelievable. It's like it's not Shure, it's not AKG. I can't remember what it is. I mean, it's been so long.
Yeah.
But, and that's terrible. But, it's like when you're doing stuff every day, and I'm like a gearhead, but, it's like, okay, Michael Wagner said, yeah, check this out. And I'm like, okay, I got it. I wish I could remember, but I don't.
Yeah.
I will.
Do you use a bottom snare mic?
Yes, I do, and that's just a 2021
Let me see if my legs will let me get down here.
Just an Audio Technica.
I don't. Oh, there it is over there.
Again, it's probably not in the right position because of the cleaning.
And is it what is it? An Audio Technica?
I think 18-20-21.
Okay. And that, of course, gets phase flipped.
Yes and no. Sometimes,
You listen and decide.
I listen and decide.
Okay.
Because, sometimes if you flip it, you lose a little of the fat.
Right. Great point.
So it all depends on where the top is and what sound I'm going for.
Me and Nir Z were doing a drum library for somebody.
Yeah.
And we looked at all the phase stuff, but we inevitably made our decisions based off of what we heard.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, I could... Even if it's wrong, if I like the way it sounds, I'm gonna
Yeah. So I mean, and again, I try to get everything everything that when it leaves here that it's all phase correct. I learned about that early, and so I try to be. And
but let's face it, part of what makes a drum sound great is all the interphase. Everything may not be 180 degrees out of phase, but this mic is going to be a certain amount of degrees out of phase with your snare that will actually add dimension, right? It actually gives a sense of space. So
it really does. And
phase is not, in the old days when they used to gate everything, it's not to your benefit. I listen to my toms in and out.
Yeah.
Sometimes my snare sounds better with them in.
Yeah.
As long as the guy is a great drummer and he tunes well and it does not sitting there rumbling, I'll make that decision based off the snare sound.
Sure. So I mean, generally it is, and the same with the kick drum too. I have 2 mics, and I'll flip those to make sure that's right too. But sometimes, it gives you a nice kind of clicky thing, like for metal stuff.
Well, and let's face it, if you have two microphones that are panned in the same exact location, phase is irrelevant in regards to left-right phase.
That's right.
It turns into an EQ.
It's an EQ.
So you may have phase shift that brings out lower mids and gives you an EQ curve that
and it also, sometimes what I'll do is I'll make my, I know we didn't get to the kick yet, but I'll bring the external mic a little further out, which that really places a big difference. And some guys have told me that when they're mixing, and even when I mix stuff, I might bring that external mic and line it up better. And then that'll change the phase of it then. Yeah, so it's not feeling so far away. But the thing is if you could get like we all know, a bass wave is slow. So the further out, you could literally, you know, when people have the woofers and all that stuff, really all you got to do is move your microphone a little further out and give it a little more volume, a little more gain. And you'll get that, you know what I mean? You'll get that big bottomy sound, but then you're gonna have to work with the phase on that one. Sometimes you flip it, sometimes you don't. So but again, I try to let and I'm talking that stuff I do more when I am producing stuff and I'm going for something. Right. But when I'm sending someone to, you know, another producer, it's totally up to their
try to
discretion.
keep it sounding great, but vanilla, so that they can drag it this way, or they can get a real clicky kick, or they can get a real 70s kick.
Right. So,
all right, real quick, before we get to your kick drum.
Yeah.
You've got an ATM 450?
Yes.
Which I love these mics. I used to use them quite a bit on toms, but I started using yours on a hat.
Actually, they are good on toms. I have another one sometimes when I'm doing like a little jazzy kind of setup with the higher end toms, with the tighter toms. I'll use two of them for the toms for that. They really are great. I mean, I love it simply because it's easy to position. That's
great
one of the
for
things.
that. And you can sneak those in on anybody's drum kit.
And I think Shure used to have a side address, and then they disappeared, you know, and everything's a little different. But for me, I always had a splash there or another ride, and it would always hit the hi-hat, and I'd have to put it really high. And
that's a great point. I love those ATM, what did I say, 450s.
450s, yeah.
For great. Sneaking in, like, hey, let's sneak something in here and get
the
bell of this if it's not showing up enough.
Yeah, I've done it where they, you know.
Even in this little thing, you could end up working it in this tiny space where you couldn't do that with a large diaphragm.
No, you can't. I've done it where they do, like they call it the crotch mic, if you will. I'll put it right between the toms, right in the middle. Like I try to find the closest point. Right. And I'll put the 450 in there, and I'll crunch the snot out of it. Yeah. With this, I have this LA Audio mic pre that I got for next to nothing. And it's so bad, it's great. You know what I mean? Like the compressor's too fast on it, it's too squishy, but I'll use that because I could get it in there and it's not in the way of my leg or getting around the kick.
Before we get to your kick, are these mics being used? You've got like a little...
That's an i5 or sometimes it's another 4050, or I'll have an aux snare. I have this little guy.
Okay, so it's like it scales out if the kit gets bigger.
Yeah, and if I'm using it like
what is
two
this
different snares.
Sort of FET 47?
That's a Marshall. That's a Marshall MXL. That was like my first room mic when I first did the room here.
What's it doing over here right now?
That is my perk mic.
Okay, for shakers and whatnot.
Shakers, tambourines, and I also have it set up that I have an aux in my Pro Tools rig, so I don't, this is like kind of just being lazy, but so I don't have to get up, you know, if I'm doing a stereo shaker or cymbal swells, what I do is I run an aux and I put the gain over it, so I could gain up the overheads. So I do all my perk from right behind here, and in these boxes is all my perk stuff.
Awesome. And can we take that tent off your kick drum?
Yes, you can.
And you tent it to keep ambience out, I guess?
Again, it all depends. If, like, you know, it's so funny because after a while, you know, your clients, you know, and I know there are some guys who are like, man, I really want a lot of the kick in the rooms. I'm going to use a lot of the rooms in the ambience. So I'm like, okay. So in that case, what I'll do is I'll take this off, and because this does kind of not hurt, but it just kind of, you get less kick in the room mics when you're covering it up like that. Yeah. But one of the reasons why I do it is because you know, again, if I move the external mic in or out, I make a little tunnel for it. So it kind of captures the whole low end.
And the goal of that is what? Just to keep it from rolling around? Are you trying to get the mics that are tented to be less capturing the rest of the kit, or are you trying to keep the kit out of the rest of the mics?
The kit out of the kick drum. Okay. So, but like I said, and then when you make a tent and it's like longer, like a tunnel, like I said, when you have the the woofers, or people add those extra pieces in front of the kick drum.
Yeah.
If you put it, I tent it, and I'll take like my djembe stand or anything, and I'll move this mic back and then give it more gain. And that gives you
And what is this, a fat 48
This is
fat?
a Studio Projects mic that I'm using at the moment. It's a basically sort of, even though it doesn't look like an 87, that's sort of what it is. This is a straight condenser, but I usually have a FET 47 that I'm having repaired.
So like
right
a
now.
U87 is what it is.
That's basically what it is.
And what's inside there? We can't
A
see
D112.
A D112. Wow, that's old school.
Yeah, just an old D112. I sometimes use the ATM 25s. That has a little more focused kind of kick. The D112 has a little bit more low end to it. The D112 is a little more focused. So like if I do a lot of rock stuff, and I did a heavy metal loop library for discrete drums years ago. So that opened up a whole world of doing heavy metal, which is like, oh my gosh, I can't play double bass at 250. But anyway, those sounds are very clicky, and there's not a lot of big fatness to it. So I'll use the ATM 25. But the D112, it's the oval football looking mic.
Let's see if I can get in there and see it. We all know it.
Yeah, know it. You love it.
I don't know about that. I've always felt like I'd spend all day EQing my D112s.
Is that right?
But I didn't appreciate LA3As for the longest time, and then now I'm in love with them.
There you
So
go.
it just goes to your experience. I see you've got a remote control station here for Pro Tools, so you can remote control your main computer.
Yeah.
Punch in.
Yes. So when I'm working just me on a track, I'll do my charting, I'll do everything out there, I'll do drum loops and all that stuff out there. And then when I come here, I have the exact same setup that's in there, mirrored screen.
But that is controlling your control room, right? It's not a separate system.
No, it's not a separate system. I have it tied in.
Yeah, just like control via mouse and keyboard.
Yes, yeah. So it does
Brilliant.
all that. So I don't have to go back and forth, and it was a little bit interesting to get it to work, but it does, and it's very convenient.
And your lounge is over there.
Yes, it's you got to have the snacks and the water, and we've got the fridge, which has a nice turkey in it right now. So
Wow, you can fit a turkey in an under.
yeah, no, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's COVID turkey. You can only have it for your family.
I can only have it for my family.
So
Right.
it's a 1.5 pound turkey.
That's right. Yeah.
Why don't you show us your control room?
Okay, sure. Come on in. Hello, Mike.
Oh my God, you got Mike Shimshack here
Look at that.
from the West Barn podcast. Look at the cats you got hanging out in this joint.
Man.
I'm telling you.
I love it. I love the studio. The body's great.
Look at that outside. He's got gold records in here, so you know he's somebody with gold records. They don't even make those anymore.
I know, right? What is a record?
He still puts his pants on.
And look what else he's
I
got.
got time.
He's got artwork from
Got the artwork from the kids who are now that one's going to college next year. Oh my gosh, I can't.
So why don't you walk us through your racks?
Okay.
Start with Mike Prees and maybe just take us
Sure.
through.
Okay. Being OCD that I am, I try to keep everything all pre's here, EQs, compressors, and effects there. So basically, we'll start here. So what I do is I have these Avitas Brett Avril's API kind of knockoffs that Avitas was making at the time. And what was really interesting about getting these is I found these two 560s online, and Avitas happened to be fixing them when I bought them. So the guy that I bought them from said, hey, my friend Avitas has these mic pre's that he kind of works to work with the API EQ. You might want to, check them out. And I said, sure, I'll check them out. The price was right. And they just sound, without the EQs, they just had the right kick and snare sound.
So that's what you put kick and snare. I was about to ask you.
That's kick and snare. Snare top goes here. And then the kick goes to this EQ, the 560, and the snare goes to the 560. Okay. And then those run into... Do you want the signal chain, or do you want to just
Well, why don't we go through your rack here, and then we'll talk
Yeah.
we'll sort of follow the signal as it would go in.
Okay, so this Anthony DiMaria Personas tube mic pre, it's an ADL 600. It's a really nice pre. It's great. I got it because I did loops for them for their their DAW. So I did a lot of their loop library, and it came up a little short financially. So they said, hey, we're going to throw in some gear. I was like, okay, that's cool. And it was like a plus. I use this a lot, actually, for keyboards and guitars is really good. It's a nice tube pre. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just fat and thick. So, and I like that it's got the, what do you call that? The
homage.
The homage.
Impedance, so you can match.
Yeah, so that's kind of nice. Yeah, I like that. And every once in a while, I might throw two toms through here with, like I mentioned, on the 450s because it's a thick sound. So I like that. I got this GML. Guy who didn't know what he had, so I love that. There's a engineer in town, Ed C, who he uses old GML stuff when he cuts drums, and it just sounds great. This goes back and forth with this snare. I go back and forth between these two as my snare chain, and it's got an EQ on it.
So this is like a channel strip. So
it's a channel strip, yeah. So
you got a mic pre. Does this have that air band in it? The GMLs had those.
No.
Oh, I'm thinking of NTI.
Yeah, no, it's so silky smooth. This one is a little more. It's not a super aggressive mic pre, but it's more aggressive than this. If I'm doing that 70s ballad, this is the one. Or a lot of country stuff that's just where you want that just fat. This is the way to go.
And then a bunch of
Jeff Daking. I've known Jeff Daking since back in the day in the jingle world, and I played drums for him through his consoles. And he was a drummer himself, and he used to have this crappy old Ludwig kit that was a mess. Like it wasn't even tuned that great. But when you went in the control room and listened to it, it sounded like you were playing in like Madison Square Garden. So when he came out with this stuff, and I was doing the studio, it happened to be sort of at the same time. We ran into each other at NAMM, and he said, a buddy told me you're doing the studio. I'll hook you up with some stuff, and so that's why I have the Dakings, and I love them. They for the way I play and the sound I get, they seem to really.
And what are they? Are they supposed to be similar to anything we know?
The best way I've heard them described, to Jeff's horror, is they're feminine Neves. Like if a Neve is a male, this is the female version of a Neve.
Bass sound like the Trident A range.
Basically, they weren't, but and very much that. But there's something a little. I don't want to say less because that's the wrong word. There's just something a little cleaner. They're a little more. Where the Neve could be so affected, the Trident could be so affected. This sort of is in the middle. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like if a Neve and a Trident had a baby, this would be it. You know what I'm saying? You get what I'm saying.
And I see you got some EQs, Daking EQs. Now.
Yeah, these are mic pre and EQs. I use this for my external kick, and just happened to get a couple of these. Figured, okay, that'll work. And then this one I use for guitars a lot, and a lot of other stuff when I'm tracking. And sometimes I'll pop the snare in there if if I'm just wanting to be different, But that's basically for guitar and external kick. And then I have this Eureka that I had. Again, that was given to me. And this is basically, I use this for vocals a lot when it's a scratch vocal track, or if there's a scratch anything. Yeah, it's okay. But it's I have enough where I could cover, and that just is a nice little extra auxiliary piece to have.
And I see you got a 1/4-inch patch bay down here to get things around.
Yes, and because I really like, as a big 300-pound Italian guy crawling around on the floor. That's what I live for. Actually, it'd be nice to have, the little TT one right here, but it's what I had and what I could afford at the time, and it all works. And everything is everything's normaled, drum-wise, so I don't have to have a million cables.
You only patch when you need to do something out of scope.
That's right. And I'm going to tell you why I actually did that. Because when you have 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, and they're playing down here, and you had a million patches, and all of a sudden your toms go away, you think, and what? So I said, you know what? No wires when there's kids.
It feels like something a 2-year-old, like you give it to play for a tactile sort of experience.
Exactly.
And below it, I see you have the Avion distribution amp.
Yes, I do.
That was the Avion boxes, which are great. 16 channels of discrete mixes for every bit on the floor.
And I actually got my own power cables, so thank you, Joe. I won't have to be borrowing yours anymore.
Oh, okay. I forgot to even borrow.
So yeah, Joe saved my butt a couple times with those. So they're great. They work.
And over to what rack do you want to do next?
We'll do this one. Okay, so this is, I just got this. Someone, they gave it to me. They said, hey, I have this. You might want to use it on your overheads. I used to use it on overheads. I've never tried it. I didn't even know it existed, but it looks cool. I actually might throw some other, like those 80s I said I had. I might throw some extra room mics and
We were talking about this on the podcast. This is the compressor that has the Morra.
The Morra. I actually want to try and go in there and make it Morra, but I don't.
But
know.
it's like, hey, do you want more compression?
Compression or less?
I love that.
I love more. So yeah, so that was good. So they're like, oh, it's good on room mics. You should try it. So I'll mess with it. Avalons, I just always saw them in studios, and I knew a buddy who had a online sales thing real early. Said, hey, I got a deal. Why don't you get some Avalons? And I literally got them because when I was just doing drums, little by little, if a writer came in who had an acoustic guitar, they'd say, oh, do you mind if I bring a bass player in? And I'm like, oh, okay, I could. So the Avalon always seemed to be the go-to for bass. So I was like, oh, I'll get an Avalon. And the guy said, I'll get you a stereo pair. I was like, okay. So I have those, and I use those a lot. I will use these on my overheads. They sound great on overheads too. It's that little more aggressive, little silkier thing. These could be a little silky. And I find the compressors on the Avalons, some people I just hate them. They're really kind of slow and they're not quick. They're just very kind of slow. Mm-hmm. So that's sometimes for drums, that's pretty cool. But I use that for bass and acoustic guitar. I mean, these days everybody comes to your session with their own whole setup and you go direct.
Right.
But so I have them there, and I will use those for vocals. When I cut vocals, I like them on vocals, but of course that's all different. Depends how they're singing. I use the API rip a lot for vocals too. But the Avalons always hear pretty good all
and
around.
Evidently, you've got an endorsement with Orban?
No, I don't have an endorsement with Orban, but because they don't even exist anymore. Again, the Michael Wagner reference. I was having lunch with him, and Michael Wagner, you guys must know him. He recorded every heavy metal record ever made. And one of the things that I always being a liner note guy, I always read who produced what, who played what, who engineered, because I was just always interested in the process, not just the music, but the process. And so when I had to, it was great. I got to sit with one of the guys who was like one of my idols, and we're having lunch, and I just said to him, one of the things that being old enough, and my dad also having been a drummer, and being in the studio watching him record live with 18 pieces and to tape and everything being so thick, I remember all that, and I remember recording drums 2-inch tape. And I felt like in the 80s when that was sort of like, when I really started doing stuff and things were starting to go digital tape, then ADATs, and then, then the Sony stuff that was all digital tape. The drums always felt like they just disappeared because you couldn't smack the tape anymore. You couldn't smack it. And so I was like blown away how Wagner got his drums on all those Ozzy records sounded like thunder. Like, how did you do that in the digital age? He was like, Orban. Now, I thought he said, with his accent, Orem, who was the Trident guy. So I said, so should I get some Tridents? And he's like, no, Orban, B-A-N. And I'm like, what in the world is that? So he told me they're basically like the Telefunken of America. It was his description of it. In that they were made for radio broadcast back in the 40s, 50s, 60s and all that stuff. And they were they were made military grade back then. So he was like, they're really, workhorse compressors and EQs. He says, you can find them on eBay cheap, which they were. I think every one I have here was no more than $250. Now, if you go look, they're over $600 online. They are very Neve-like. They really are very Neve-like. And what I love about it is you can turn,
right.
You can turn off whatever frequency you're not using to clean it up a little bit because, EQ should be a little noisy. But this is something I love, and I don't know, maybe it's because I'm not an engineer. I love that it's sweepable. Some guys like notched stuff, but you know what? Sometimes on your Tom 2, you want 190-ish. You don't want exactly 200. You don't want 100. It's just you.
And for those of you who don't know, this is a parametric EQ, a true parametric, meaning you have control over three things. You have frequency selectable. Mm-hmm. You've got gain of that frequency, and then you've got a varied Q where you can get to any width of that Q. That's what makes a fully parametric EQ. Most EQs are not fully parametric. So
Right.
full parametric EQ here.
So it's, for what they were worth, now each of them, I had to change the caps on them, which was very easy to do in these. But
You actually did it?
I actually do it.
Wow, dude, I got to send some stuff over. I got some Orban stuff.
I'm kind of a handy guy. I'm cheap too, so I try to do everything I can myself. But no, I mean, just for that, it just was pretty easy to do. So when I got the first one and put on the toms, I was like, oh my God. And I had these Trident console little boards that they were making at the time, which were nice, but this was so that sound. It's fat. You know what? It reminds me, it makes me think of like Nick Mason's toms. You know, with that boom, 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 but it's thick. The EQ's, it's a little gritty. It's not super clean, but my toms sound clean.
Nothing wrong with grit.
You know, yeah. So
right.
for what they were selling for, they just seemed to work. And then I just was like, okay, I'm going to outfit them for the whole kit. So it's sort of, I like the kit to sound cohesive. I think with the mic pre's, you move them around, but EQ wise, I don't like to get too different, and so far no one's complained about that. And those Reigns, they're just like, well, I needed an EQ for my ride cymbal, which I have a 2021 on that too. So that's the EQ for my ride, which you really don't EQ much of the ride. Just again, OCD, might as well have one.
Right.
And then my aux snare, I use that for, and half the time I bypass it and I just, go the aux snare separately, or I go through the GML.
Awesome. That. And this is your...
This is the, wrestler, wife, baby, the whole thing. Grandparents.
How cool are these?
Yeah. So yeah, you gotta have that. And then I try to keep them working. It's a big deal, right? Like,
are these vintage ones?
No.
These are like just from Spencer's or whatever.
Those are Spencer's, yeah. They're Spencer's. They're birthday gifts and Christmas gifts from the
How cool was Spencer's when we were kids? To
awesome.
Sneak in there and
look
through the posters.
Oh, yeah, man. Yeah.
Felt like you had a dirty magazine. All right, let's get on to your...
Okay. So, all right. So
what's this Neumann thing up here?
That is actually a Simon's EQ. This guy here. An old Simon's EQ, and this is a Telefunken mic pre 376. Okay. And it says bass EQ. That was for a session, but these are just what they are. They're just old, mushy, thick sounding. Talk about Nick Mason. If I put the kick through here and through here, it's that sound. It's that Abbey Road. These are
they solid state or are they tube?
These are solid state. And I made the box myself because the guy that sold me the thing he was over in Europe. The wiring was a mess and the box kept falling apart. So I kind of had this box for something else, and I built that. And then Pro Audio in town, Jimmy English, he wired it all up, and it sounds great. It's just old school stuff. It does sound great on bass guitar, but yeah, I love that for my kick sometimes. Like I'm doing vintagey kind of sounding stuff. And you kind of hit the gain pretty hard, so it's kind of nice. So there's that. Okay, so that's that deal. Then I got my central station, which is the usual control center for speakers and whatever, what have you. It works great. Again, I have a relationship with Personas, and they made it happen, and it works. And like Mike, if it works, right? I ain't fixing it. It ain't broke. I'm leaving it. Compressors. I never got into the heavy duty LA 2As and 1176s and all that stuff. One, because of plugins, and as far as tracking goes, one thing I learned early on was to not compress to tape too much. I have a DBX 160, a vintage one, two of them. Nice. Because again, every studio I went to in New York, and then when I came here, because that's like a staple that you ran the kick and snare through. And if it's even compressing, it's maybe compressing. It's just more of the sound that it's given. It really gives, to me, it almost is like, okay, that's why my kick and snare maybe sound like they're going to tape. You could hit them a little hard and it gives them a little sound. So that's the DBX 160s. I had to have those. Then as time went on, I was like, okay, well, what are you going to do for your overheads? When I wasn't using the Avalons. So I got this DBX 166. I was actually looking for the DBX 160, the mono ones.
Right.
But a guy said, no, they have 166. I had never seen it. And he's, it's like for overheads, it'll be fine. And so I got that, and it's fine. I had it worked on at this place, Revive Audio, that I think is in Indiana. They're pretty cool. They kind of have all the old parts for DBX. So it's original. It's fixed all original. This Ashley is just, again, there was a guy, needed a tune, came up a little short. I got some gear for you. So I got that Ashley. It's all right. It's just a regular. I might use it on guitars or whatever if I'm tracking. I have these old TL audios that
Tony Larkin audio.
Yeah, I used to have EQs that he made.
Right, I remember that.
The EQ pre's. They're really cool, man. So I actually have two of them, and then I got to get them fixed. I really like those. But I went to the studio, and the snare was really kicking, really sounded good in the toms. He had the same setup. He had an indigo and a crimson one, and he said, "Yeah, they're tubes. They're tube compressors." And I'm like, "Wow, man." He said, "So you should check them out." And he says they're really cool. So I did, and they are really nice. I will use these a lot, like if I'm gonna compress bass. They're really cool. They're not gonna color it too much, because again, I feel like when people are tracking here, they want to get. I don't want. We said vanilla before, yes, but you want to get like the cleanest, clearest tone that's not too affected, so that whoever is going to mix and do whatever they're going to do later has, they have like a clean slate of where they're going to start. Where it's like, oh, I wish the bass wasn't compressed so much. Oh, I wish the guitars or the drums weren't compressed so much. In the beginning, I was going for that. And a lot of mix guys were like, man, you back off the compression when you're recording, because give me some room to do stuff. So that's why I never really got heavy into the compression thing. As far as, the toms and all that, I figured let's just get it as clean and natural as possible. That way it gives wherever it's going to the next stage, they have, free reign to do stuff. And then I have the distressors. You have to have those for your rooms, and you got to nuke them. And I do use those when if I'm overdubbing guitars, I'll use that. I'll use them on vocals as like a limiter. They're just great. There's nothing you can do really wrong with them. You know what I mean? But when you learn about what they could do, you could really pull a lot of sound out of stuff.
Yeah.
So I really would like to have another pair for kick and snare to go back and forth, because kick and snares do sound good through them. And then there's Behringer compressor. When I was first doing the studio, what was that place? Warren White had a place. Was it Pro? You might not have. It might have been gone by the time you got here, Mike. But he had this, and he said, "Look, man, I'm blowing these out. They were trying to go for this vintage compressor thing, and no one's buying them because it's got the prosumer look to it." So that's what I had originally for my kick and snare when I first started. And Steve Marcantonio, one of the engineers in town, he came over to the house and he was like, "You know what? Don't ever get better compressors, but don't get rid of this compressor. And for him to say he hates, it's like that commercial. Give it to Mikey.
Is it just a compressor?
It's a compressor.
Why is there four?
I think there's a gate. Is there a gate on it too?
Why are there 4 meters on it? Input and output?
Okay, yeah. There's also, it's a tube compressor, so you could dial in how much tube you're using. And then this is just for if you're going to use it as a limiter. It's got a separate setup for that. But you could dial in how much tube you want to use, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And they sound good, man. It really, as I've learned more and more about compressors, I'm like, it's a nice compressor. So I use that for my external kick. It really gives it a nice thick, I use a lot of the tube. It gives it a nice thick sound. And then the other side I use for my aux snare. Because when I, like the aux snare a lot, if I'm using it's sort of a small snare, like it's almost like when I'm playing like I'm a loop. And I'll affect that a little bit sometimes. Sometimes I'll do 2 signals, a clean and a compressed signal. Mm-hmm. So that's what I use that for. And then I have this little, it's an M300 TC Electronics unit.
What are we looking at? Oh, that silver one?
It's hidden down there. It's sort of like my secret weapon. Mm. I was working at someone's studio and I was programming drums for them, or as the kids say now, making beats. you know, making beats. That's funny to me. Anyway, so I was not my SP12. Boy, that was a long time. That was my MPC, and I'm like, you know, going through his little rig, and I'm programming. I'm like, man, these drums really sound real. They, you know, I had great samples, but I said, what, the ambient sound? It wasn't a reverb. It sounded like ambience. And he goes, wow, it's funny you say that because that's what the patch is. It's an ambience patch. And it literally did, you know, it didn't have a like that tail. It just sounded like when you walk into a room and you hit the drums, it's ambient.
So that's a reverb.
That's a reverb unit. It's a multi-effects unit. Very good multi-effects unit. But I use it for the ambience and the plate. There's a good plate on there for the drums too. So what I do is this is a secret. I'm giving you the secret sauce, you know, how grandma used to make the sauce here. And this will address why it sounds so much bigger. What I realized is, like, whenever you go into a studio, you see they have the room mics, right? And if you're in a big room, like Ocean Way or something like that, they have these mics that are way up in the stratosphere. So you got your room mics forward that are compressed and crunchy. But then you have these other, and it's like, man, that just makes it beautiful. So when I was in here, like I said earlier, I don't know if I said on tape, but this room that we're in now, the drums are used to be where I'm sitting, and the board was over there. And I used to put a room mic in the garage and leave the door open. And it sounded great. It sounded really cool for a mono room mic, and then I went stereo and all that. I had a couple different guys come in and, you know, help and, you know, with engineering stuff and to give their take, and it sounded good, but that was missing. That ambience was missing. So one guy suggested, he said, look, man, you got a million plugins, just get a DSP plugin, put a reverb over it or something like that. So we toyed with that. It just sounded like the drums were in reverb. Didn't sound natural to me. So I remembered the programming thing with the M300. So I ran to GC Pro, bought an M300, came home, and I had an intern at the time. And I was like, listen, I want you to just what I did is I said, I don't want the drum set in reverb. I want, when you have ambience, the sound is already in the room. So what I said is I'm going to take the room mics, and because the patch bay is half normaled, I go take the room mics before they hit the distressor. So it's just the room mics clean. And because it's half normal, I go out of the output of them. It's still going to the distressors. And then I take that output and put that into the room mic, into the ambience. So that it's like you're getting the EQ of the drums, like not just like a big picture of the drums in the room going into the ambience. And my gosh, that was like magic. And it just feels so natural that way. And then I said, well, let me just try and make it, you know, bust just the drums to the ambience, and it just sounded like drums and reverb, even though it was ambience. So that was my little, you know, my little trick, and it seemed to really work. And then with this particular unit, you can dial in pre-delay, you can dial in color, you could dial in decay. So I could really tailor that ambience to whatever I'm doing track-wise. You know.
And you'll maybe pull up a track and show us?
Sure.
But real quick, before you do that, you're running on KRK V8s for your big ones?
For the big boys.
8-inch speakers, and you've got these little K-Rock Rocket
5s. The original Rocket 5s, which are just, you know, I got them because my kids' rooms are above me. So I was like, I need small speakers so I can just listen. But they sound great. They really sound great.
No subwoofer in the room?
No subwoofer in the room. I was talking earlier before we went to tape that because of the cubish setup here, and it's probably Carl Tatz would have a heart attack if he walked into this room. But, you know, it's like there's space behind there. As you see, I have, the foam and all that. And there's some foam down there. But there's a little low-end buildup that comes out of here. So, it really kind of works when I'm tracking drums, and I gotta get that low-end thumpy business. You can hear it. Like even when I play the track, it's the low end isn't just coming from the speakers; it comes from down here too. So that's good. So I never had to get a sub for that. And then when I mix, what I do is I have a foam board, a piece that goes inside the window. and then I have a bass trap in the corner. I put that down here, so when I'm mixing, I'm just sort of getting what's in here. But for tracking the drums, it's nice. The drums feel big.
And can you tell, you're on Pro Tools?
Pro Tools HDX.
Okay, and can you play us? Well, what we'll do is you can talk us through the tracks. Maybe bring the volume down a little so we can hear you.
Yeah.
And then we'll, there's your central station remote.
Yeah.
And then we'll get an ISO of the drum sound with maybe some room coming in that you can, that we can post with it.
Sure.
Talk us through it.
Okay, so I'll do this so we can see everything. All right, I'll take my glasses off. Okay, so I have external kick, snare top, snare bottom, the hi-hat, toms 1, 2, 3, and 4, which changes from tune to tune, overheads, and I do everything mono. I do everything as a mono signal. Someone wants to bring them together as a stereo signal later, that's great. I do everything mono. Left and right room, left and right ambience. And then I have my ride. And then what I do is I bus everything to a sub, and I just throw the typical pro limiter that comes with Pro Tools just over it to make it a little fatter in my headphones, and in the room a little bit. And then what I do when I'm recording is I always bus the take to a 2 mix. And why I want to do that simultaneously is that, for this particular tune, I did 3, I might have done 2 for this, whatever. Yeah, I did 5 passes for the guy. He wanted 5 passes. So depending upon if someone has Pro Tools, they could bring in the session data. If they don't, they have Logic or any other DAW, they got to bring in all those files and then set up playlists. And if they just want to listen quick, they don't have to bring in the whole 16 tracks of drums individually. They could just bring in the stereo track and listen down. And that way they could either go, you know what, take 3 was great, I'm just going to bring that in. Or they could say, I like a little take 2. So I like to give them the option so you don't have to have all that file stuff that you really don't need till you mix. So I do that as a little plus. And I have like my shakers and tambourines and loops and stuff set up. Okay, so here's this is cool. This is what they programmed, and I had to match it, so this was kind of fun. Let's see. Oops, hold on a second. So that's basic what it sounds like when I'm tracking. I'm just trying to sound just a little bit. Put a little bit on it. So if you notice, there's nothing. There's not one plug-in on anything. One, I hate latency. I don't want any latency when I'm playing. I want it to feel like the drums. So I like to get everything hitting the computer the way it's going to sound. So that's it. Like, the only thing is it's the limiters over it, and that just makes it a little louder is all it's doing. So that's really...
Can you bring the rooms in and out? Let us hear
Sure.
what, like, the tightest sound you can get out of that?
Yeah. All right. So right now I'm gonna take the ambience out. No, I'm lying. I just took the ride out. Now I'm gonna take the ambience out. Okay. Now I'm gonna give you a little more room, Mike, so you can hear them. That's the crushed rooms. Get rid of those. That's just the drums close mic. Okay. So that's pretty tight. Is your external kick. Really for feel, not to be your main guy. And here's your tight kick. This one I went a little clickier on it. Snare bottom. Little half there. Your overheads, hopefully snare drum in the middle. Oh, and another thing I like to do is, this is a little wacky, but and this is preference. Again, it's preference. Some guys want the drums totally left and right, and a drum fill will go from the very right side of the speakers to the left side. When I'm tracking and recording, for me as just a player and even as a producer, I'll listen drummer's perspective because I'm just used to it. But when I mix from audience perspective. But I just, in the old days, it was kind of cool when the toms would go all the way around when Nigel Olsson had his, Octoplus set up. But to me, and when I became got into more mixing and listened to mixes, it's sort of like out of left field. And it took up so much space. And I thought the drums are really in the middle of the band. They're not all the way to the left and right. So I kind of bring the drums in a little bit like this, kind of almost this way. What is that? 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. And it definitely like changes the volume of the kick. It really centers stuff. Helps with the phasing too. So that's one thing I try to do is not have everything. The rooms and the ambience I might do wide, but I try to keep things tight. All right, but that's again, it's all mono. So
we're gonna put a file in here where we do the same sequence. So we'll hear just isolated from Pro Tools, and it will play at the end of this video, where you can listen to the drum sound with the ambience up. I think you took the ambience out first.
Ambience out first,
and then you took out the rooms.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll hear the ambience come out, and then we'll hear those things sort of crank. So you can just sort of go to the end of this recording to hear that isolated in Pro Tools.
And I'll put them back in just so we have that too. So here. So
well, I think is that it? Is that the quintessential tour of your facility?
That's pretty much it. I mean,
We miss anything?
I don't know.
There were no bagels or what were we talking about earlier?
What?
Coffee cakes and...
Coffee cake, yeah. Everybody knocks. It's just...
when I have folks to my place, they usually have coffee cakes.
Yeah. I have
bagels.
stuff. I have treats and snacks and stuff. I'll tell you what I do, and it's totally selfishly motivated. But if I'm doing a tracking session here, like, I'll do these days where, I have like 4 or 5 writer friends, and they're like, I got 2 songs, I got 1 song. So I'll book the band for, 3 sessions. And we'll cut 9 songs. We do like an hour song. So, but what I do the night before is I make meatball, sausage, and pasta, and I serve dinner. Yeah, right. Just because the camaraderie and the fun of it, a little wine, a little pasta, right? But here's the real deal: musicians are morons and they don't know how to tell time. I'm one of them. You go out to dinner and if you start yakking like I do, you're never back in time. So this way, if I have them in the house eating and it's like 6 o'clock, we're back on time. So
all it costs you a box of spaghetti.
That's it, man. It all costs me a box of spaghetti, some meatballs, and sausage, which is an Italian. You always have that laying around, So so there's that part of the studio too. But but I was saying because the funny thing because obviously I'm from New York City, right? We didn't address that, but I'm from New York, and people just come in. They just walk in. Everybody's so nice. They knock, and there's 2 doors. So if I'm here working and getting a session ready and someone's knocking, I don't hear anything. I'm deaf as it is. So it's like, everybody knocks. It's like, just come in. New York, everybody barges in. But, when you go somewhere, and it's funny, my daughter's going to a little Friendsgiving, they call it now, right? And I said to her, and I don't know if this is like an old school thing or an Italian thing, but whenever you visited, you brought a little something. You brought a little coffee cake or, little Entenmann's. We used to have Entenmann's, right? Yeah, the Entenmann's. So, you always brought a little something, but so, it's like they knock and they don't bring anything. It's, what are you going to do?
Well, thank you for showing us your place. You're a great soul. And Tony does do remote work, so we're going to put his email down in the description to this video so you can go contact him and he can play on your stuff.
One thing, as you say that, can I add one little thing?
Yeah.
Okay. There's another thing that I do when I'm doing sessions for y'all. And what I have here is I bus out of this thing to this thing called Nicecast. See that? Nicecast. It's not popping up there. But what it is, see this little guy over here? They don't even make it anymore. It was a podcast. You guys as podcasters know. It's just a podcast thing. And what I do when it wants to work. Okay, so it's having its moment. So what it is just an old podcast thing. So what I do is I just click on it, and I send you the link. I email it to you on your phone, on your computer, your laptop, wherever you're at. And it basically you just hit on your browser. Or you hit on it, and it opens up in your browser. Now the thing is, people are like, well, you could do that with Zoom. You could do that with Skype. The audio portions of those things never sound the way it sounds in the room. This thing does, because I'm going directly out of Pro Tools into my computer, broadcasting it. So I have done broadcasts with this to like Tokyo and Brazil.
So people can sit in on their
They
remote
can
sessions.
sit in on their own session. And these days with, unlimited
You're a brave man. I would not invite people into that session.
No, it's cool. You know what? I got to tell you, what?
There's no better way to turn a 1 hour session into a 10-hour session.
True, but I do get paid each hour after my rate. So I got that covered. But the thing is, now, in reality, sometimes it saves the client money and me time, because especially with drums, until people hear it sometimes, they're not sure what they want. You know what I mean? I think they do,
right.
And they're not sure. So I could do, and basically what I do is someone sends me a track that they programmed, I do that. Then I do a second take that's sort of like that. Then I do a third take that's sort of like, okay, probably none of this is good, but you never know. It's sort of
I can attest, I've had Tony play on records for me, and he is the most accommodating guy. He's a great talent.
Oh, thank you.
And a really, if he wants you to leave happy, so.
Yeah,
He also orders buca de pepa in your area and has it delivered.
And have it delivered, so we're all eating.
While
it's all
you're
about
watching
the
the
food,
session.
That's right. But the thing is that when you're on Nicecast, and if there's someone who's not sure, they need to hear it in the immediacy. You don't have to do that back and forth.
Yeah.
Send the files, so they're hearing it and they're like, oh, in the bridge, just crash ride. Because some people just want one take. Yeah. And they don't want all the things. So I do that too. So you have that option. And I've done people on vacation sitting on the beach listening to the tracks. So that's a cool little thing.
That's the way I want to do it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you can, right? I unfortunately can't. But
all right, buddy. Thank you for
man.
showing us what a great room. This is what people can do this. If you have a garage, you can do this.
You can do this, man.
You got to learn how to play like Tony Morra, but you can do this.
Little, but you could do it. Totally.
Well, that's it. Signing off from the West Barn for our Show Us Your Studio tour. Go ahead and send us your studio. We've got a little link down in the description that whenever you hit it, it will cue you to upload your video. Just say your name and the name of your studio, and then walk us through it. We'd be really excited to see it. We're looking forward to all those. We're starting to come in now.
Excellent.
So from Joe West and
Mike Shimshack
and Tony Morra, we're signing off from Downtown Batterie Studio.
I can't even say it. Downtown Batterie Studios.
Franklin, Tennessee.
That's right.
Peace out.
Peace out.